This is a general definition of informed consent, which means to agree. And the things which are more important, I've just tried to highlight, saying it's voluntary. The process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. And the informed consent is documented by means of written, signed and dated forms. So it's actually, if you're looking at it as a paper on which you put a signature, I don't think that's quite okay, because in pro cycling, it's not all just about the bike. Similarly, if you talk about informed consent, it's not just about the form and the signature on it, because as you see, it's more than a signature, which means that you've been given adequate time to decide, and then you voluntarily agreed to participate in the trial. You had means proper comprehension of what exactly you were going to participate in, and had time to ask questions. So these are some of the important things which we look when we go for audits and see the documentation of the consent process. So one of the pillars is accurate information and the other is effective communication. Elements, of course, these are the routine elements of the informed consent. And the basic elements consist of disclosure, understanding, voluntariness, competence and consent. And how much information to be given. Like when you're presenting information, what, when, how much and how, which means to say how informed is the informed consent. Because many times when you go and find out, especially in the double-blind trial, it's very difficult for the investigator to say, I don't know what I'm giving, you don't know what you're getting, but you have to participate. So something like that. And then voluntariness. This is something important because in India, it is a group consent, like the entire family consent for a subject's participation. But it is the subject who has to consent. And any trial-related procedure should begin only after the consent is obtained. Which means that even if you're taking the height and weight related to the trial, it should be after taking the consent. So if we talk about informed consent process, what is the information which is being informed? That is full knowledge and understanding. Consent is a decision to participate voluntarily. And then the process, it's a dynamic process. It's not just a signature and it's not over, it's a dynamic process. So it actually starts right from recruitment throughout the life of the study. And if there is a follow-up period also, it continues into that. So what are the challenges of the informed consent? First, language and literacy barrier, because in India we have so many languages, so that becomes translations, back translations are definitely going to be cumbersome. And then literacy also, because many a times, especially in government institutions, you do get patients who are not very literate. Then the complex informed consent form, for an illiterate person, explaining one page itself is difficult. And if you see the multinational, multi-center clinical trials, they're running to 10 to 12 pages. So we used to have at least, an hour, a couple of hours spending just to explain to the patient for the first time what that form contained. And then comprehension, we have explained, but has a patient understood? So that will be another challenge. And how to assess comprehension? Again, you have various strata of people and various age groups. And then the time constraint. This is another very important thing. So the investigation should have adequate time. And consent in vulnerable population is again a Herculean task. And researchers' communication skill. So if they're able to communicate properly, then you have a good enrollment and retention. Because the patient is most of the time very anxious and stressed when you ask them to sign on a form. So in vulnerable populations, of course, it's the same thing. It is the language and communication barrier. Because they have a limited decision capacity build making, and they have a very poor understanding, and there are a lot of cultural differences also. So now coming to the challenges with the traditional pencil method, because static document, it's lengthy, difficult to understand. And then you have complex terminologies. How much ever we tell them to make it in simple languages, being the member secretary of ethics committee for more than a decade, it's really impossible to make the clinicians understand that they have to go to the grassroots level sort language and try to put it across. But still, that's very difficult. And difficult for the participants to revisit information later on. So this actually one of our recent audits, because I go for NABH assessment, when we interviewed the participant of a phase 2 trial, and then we just asked for side effect. Some they could say, and then they said, no, I have to go back and see in the paper, which is at my house. So if they want to, immediately check, it's not possible with the paper method. So that was a big disadvantage. And then if it's not, seeing is believing. So if it's not visually appealing, then the patients may not be motivated enough, and they may not be able to comprehend enough to participate. So I've just listed some of the findings which we got during our monitorings. One is copy of the consent form not given, because this is something which happens most of the time when we go for audits. So it has to be documented real time that we have given the form, they have taken and given the consent, which may not happen many a times. Investigator dates for the participant, because they forget, and later on when the investigator is checking, they do date. And it's not difficult for an auditor to find out, that is the same pen, same person, same writing. Then investigator signs but forgets to date. Then IC is not administered the language best understood by the participant. If it is not administered, then there should be a note to file or a source document actually telling why this did not happen. Incorrect version of the ICF being used. And then the relationship of impartial witness or not being mentioned if it is actually required. So now going ahead, like I said, it's if it's just a paper form, it's very difficult for someone to comprehend. So that is based on one study where it's actually a literature review. 6 databases were reviewed for comprehension of informed consent. So just try to find out whether the participants are able to actually comprehend what they are reading. So when you go through that, you can see that in the conclusion, it was found that patients' recollection and understanding of the medical procedures, risks and complications is often low, especially in the elderly subjects. So they're not able to remember, comprehend, and especially with an elder patient, it's even worse. But if you're using interactive multimedia written material which are easy to remember and comprehend, then they were able to remember better. So that was the conclusion of this study. And even FDA in the recent guidelines in March 2024 has said that informed consent document should begin with a concise and focused presentation of the key information that is most likely to assist a prospective subject or legally authorized representative in understanding the reason why one should participate or may not participate in the research. So this definition is extremely, very, very clear. You have to give a focused presentation of what is the study and give the main features which help in decision making. And then the key information they further went on to say it can be presented illustrations, videos and electronic tablets so that you meet the goal of the study. So gone are the days when you have the long informed consent forms, a patient lying on the bed and doctor going on describing about the informed consent, which can be sometimes a little cruel. But having said the things, how can you improve this whole process? Is there a way in which you can improve the informed consent process? So one is engage the participants in a dialogue. It is most of the time the investigator keeps telling the patient, but very rarely the patients, especially in our country, normally they don't ask many questions. So you have to encourage them into a dialogue so that they ask you questions. And then to enhance comprehension, as I said, use plain language, interactive sessions, AI, that is the in thing today, and multimedia tools. And then, of course, good communication. So this is what we have done in one study where we have done for antihistamine. So this was an extension in the phase 1 where if to say a drug is antihistaminic, we had a pharmacodynamic methods. So it was a phase 1 study. I don't remember whether it's levocetirizine or rupatadine. So if it's a really antihistaminic working, if you give histamine, you normally get a wheal and flare. And if you're giving an antihistaminic, that should actually come down. So that's one of the dynamic methods. So when you try to tell a subject intradermal injection of histamine, wheal and flare, they found it very difficult to comprehend because these are mostly healthy volunteer studies. So we had this interactive way of putting a picture on saying how we give the injection, what is wheal and what is flare, and what do we expect before and after. So then this was pretty motivating, and we did have a good enrollment in this study. So I think once you keep seeing something, you understand better, comprehend better, and do better. So that is the place where you have the technology and the AI tools coming up. So but one thing is that you have to remember that any innovative technology or any innovating procedures you are trying, you need an ethics committee approval. For an informed consent you may take, but even the technology which you are using needs an ethics committee approval. There should be site-specific SOPs for these procedures, and even the ethics committee should have some SOPs as to how they will be evaluating such procedures. So I don't think many ethics committees do have such SOPs. So especially with our accreditation coming up, I think it's a good idea that the site has SOPs, the ethics committee also has SOPs for review of these technologies. So e-consent is the first thing which has come up, especially with COVID, electronic consent because it's easier. It has come up first. Then we have the mobile applications. Then of course virtual reality where you stimulate procedures which I'll be showing. And then use of AI, especially for translations. So education animations and videos, these actually, they can simplify a complex medical concept. So because I've just put it in, if you're doing it, some complex medical studies, you can make it more simpler and easily understandable by using this, and that engages the participant also. So this is one thing which we had done. Suppose we wanted to study the effect on the endothelial function. So we are trying to explain to the patient what it means, like the plaque forming in the artery and what happens and how you evaluate and all. So then we had made this video to tell them what exactly we are looking at, what is the normal blood flow and what happens if there is a decrease in the blood flow and stuff like that. So this is pretty useful tool for patients. Then we had the speaking books. Actually this we had done it with ISCR, Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences, and then Pfizer was the main support for this speaking book. We made this book for lay people to understand what is research and what is the meaning of research, and we were the first ones to get it translated to Telugu. The book speaks, you have the side buttons, if you can see, you just click on that and it will be speaking as to what is the procedure, what is research and what does consent mean and all that. So this was a more interactive thing. And then moving on to the electronic consent. If you have managed to read the ICMR guidelines, they have come up with very beautiful guidelines on national guidelines, especially during COVID. And the point number 4, they talk about electronic consent. So it is a digital platform for presenting informed consent information and includes video explanations, animations, and stuff like that. And the Indian regulators do have a regulatory requirement for that. That is, they say that you have to comply with the IT Act 2000 regarding electronic consent, signatures and records. And then how the electronic consent data will be stored, for how long, and who will have access, which means that there should be again site-specific SOPs as well as SOPs for the ethics committees when you're using this. Because recently in one of the audits we found that it was a common computer, something like this, where they were using. So there should be some sort of an access control to that, because this data has to be stored for at least 15 years. So, and then there should be a backup. And backup can be a pen drive which is left in the car, in your bag or something. So everything should have an SOP and should follow an SOP. So that's again very important. And validated to ensure reliability, accuracy, and consistency. This again is important, because each time if you open the system, there's no consistency, then it doesn't make much of a sense. And then more importantly, you should have a system to maintain confidentiality and privacy, because this is something like a remote system happening. So anyone using the password may be able to access. So there should be some sort of a privacy and confidentiality of the patient data. And then you should have an audit trail. Just like a clinical trial, you have an audit trail for an ECRF. You should have a similar system of an audit trail. And these are the key considerations for effective e-consent solution. Participant-friendly interface where anyone can access. Workflow alignment should be very clear, and compliance with the standards, with the regulatory standards, whether it's Indian regulations or international regulations or both. Yeah, the advantage is obviously that it is more real time, and then improves comprehension and understanding, and it can be done with, it has a flexibility of being done in a remote place, especially in disaster conditions and COVID type of conditions, and because you have given adequate time. However, the flip side is the challenges of this. We have talked about the good things, now what are the challenges? Elderly patients may struggle if you have to give them, because as I said, many patients in India are not tech savvy, so especially the elderly patients, to use a remote device, they may find it difficult. Security is again data security. And then whether it's legally valid and verifiable signatures, e-signatures. So there should be some sort of system, whether you sign it or you give them one passcode. In some studies, we were giving them a passcode. You just press and you get some number which they have to enter, and that is again connected centrally. So each time you press that number and you enter that number, then there is an audit trail as to who has accessed it and when it was accessed, and were there any changes made. It's something like an ECRF sort. And then internet connectivity. That's again a big problem in our country. The rural areas, internet connectivity is bad. So again, it becomes a challenge. So some of this is a regulatory compliant, patient-friendly electronic consent system which can be used. This is just an example which I've just put. There are many more systems there, but this is just one. Since it should be regulatory compliant again, it's not that you just design your own and do it. There should be some regulatory compliance. Then you have some decisions tools to support this, which software tools are there which help in the patient understanding, providing risk-benefit analysis and so on. So there are a lot of software tools available. And then you have mobile apps also. So if it's just a consent, e-consent, you are not, sometimes earlier you were given some devices which the patient was given and then they had to sign and stuff like that. But now you have these mobile apps which can, you can just download the app and then deliver the consent material is given through the app. It's an interactive app and that's pretty helpful actually. So that patient can do it at his own pace and anytime. This is one of the things like research kit. The study is still ongoing. It's the PRIDE study from the University of California, where the protocol is an observational study in adolescents with arthritis. The study is still going on. So they have been using this. And these are some of the apps you can just download, and they're pretty user-friendly and interactive. And coming next to AI, because no presentation is complete today if you don't talk about AI. So AI in relation to the informed consent. Again, we have ICMR guidelines which very clearly tell you everything which needs to be done and how it is to be done. Because by definition, artificial intelligence is a system's ability to correctly interpret external data and to use those learnings to achieve specific goals and tasks through flexible adaptation. That is the definition of AI. So informed consent in AI research, like it has unique risks again because it's a machine, it's not like human brain thinking. No? So only what information is fed, you start gathering from that. So data privacy, algorithm bias can be there. And transparency, I'm not too sure how transparently you can explain the process and outcomes. And then since consent is a dynamic, it is not a one-time signature. So that system should be able to adapt to the changes which are being there, each time the informed consent changes. And AI translation tools for informed consent. This is something which is very important because most of the people use Google translations. I'm not talking about the multinational, multicentric studies, but the regular research which happens, maybe a student research or academic research, they use Google translation. You have a translation, you have back translation, you get a certificate, but the meaning is not at all conveyed in that. So, which means that suppose, elderly falls. So one protocol using, when I was a member secretary, saying it falls in the elderly. Falls ka meaning in Hindi comes as jharna. Jharna is a waterfall. So that is not what we were actually thinking of. So you get a translation, back translation certificate, but the meaning changes. So here you can use AI. When you speak into it, the system, by default will be converting and telling what exactly you want. So in a way, yes, it may be helpful. And so clinical trend translations are pretty helpful, and a lot of softwares which are, again, regulatory approved. ChatGPT, the in thing today. So this is one trial where improving clinical trial consent form readability through artificial intelligence, where they had used ChatGPT, and this was pretty good information, and this was presented, especially this happened in an oncology clinical trial. So, you get that big consent form down to the level of a 6th grade literacy person. So that was pretty helpful. And confidentiality of information using AI tools. It is important to know that patient identifiers can be present as metadata, a data that gives information about others' data, and as on-image data, and both. So, how you want your data, you have to put it accordingly. And then all technologies requiring human biometric data should have additional security measures, because if you're taking a consent using biometrics, then again, there'll be a breach of confidentiality, then will be a trouble. Then approval from EC and regulatory bodies is mandatory when you're using such systems. And accidental leak of such data may have unprecedented consequences. So whenever you're putting this AI or something into your consents, or for that matter, anything, then there should be SOPs again, site-specific as well as EC-specific SOPs as how to read, and that everything is given in that ICMR guidance document. I think it's worth going through that because they elaborated everything very well. So best practices for informed consent in AI is clear communication, patient education, and of course, ethical considerations. Specific challenges, data privacy has always been a problem. Then algorithmic bias, and then transparency, because again, the systems are not very specific. So then effective informed consent can lead to improved patient consent and trial experience. So that will increase the patient enrollment, And if there's improved comprehension, and you see, always a willing horse is more easy to manage. So there'll be better compliance and patient retention, because many clinical trials, retention is a problem. And improved consent, compliance to consent leads to lesser protocol deviations, because once you know what you're doing, then you have less deviations. And real-time monitoring of data is another thing. So thus, a properly administered informed consent form is the foundational concept of a GCP compliant study. So now we have seen a transformation, like from what we were doing as investigators, maybe around 2 to 3 decades back, to what is happening today. There's a real transformation. It was sponsor-centric at that point of time. Now it's become more patient-centric. From paper consent, now we are moving to multimedia digital consents. From poor patient comprehension to focus on patient comprehension. Lengthy and difficult consent forms are being made shorter and simplified and more interactive. These are the references, and thank you, because putting the informed in the informed consent is something which is always very important and we need to remember. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Usharani. You have very nicely highlighted.
Like this was there in one of the sites which we had visited. They had a main focus center, and then they had 2-3 peripheral hospitals which are connected to that main center. And when they were enrolling, because ICMR says equitable distribution, so this main center was a little different, and that was a little socio-economical lower center. So they had to have equal distribution. So that time they had used this mobile app. And then of course you have some doctor and staff are there in the PHC, and they had it pretty interactive, because when we go there for auditing, for inspections, we asked them to show, and they had recorded, and it was pretty well, like because phone, everybody, I don't know, I'm not sure whether you can use all the applications in my mobile, but we have seen that people in the rural area are pretty conversant with the mobile apps. So they could handle it pretty well, and they could communicate. And but one problem with the site was they didn't have a specific SOP for that, which was missing. So I think it's always better first make the SOP and then follow the SOP, so that then that will be no audit findings. But it worked there very well, and that was. Yeah, that onus lies on the ethics committee, and that guideline has very clearly given everything on the ethical aspects also, that artificial intelligence, I think everyone should read that. They're very well documented as to how you should do everything step by step, including the SOP aspects. So once the systems are there and it is followed, I think it is fair enough. And then real-time documentation of everything. So you cannot get away with paper method. You have to still document it somewhere. So, yeah, thank you.